Well, welcome to It's an Inside Job BiteSize Fridays, your weekly dose of resilience, optimism, and well-being to get you ready for the weekend. Now, each week, I'll bring you insightful tips and uplifting stories to help you navigate life's challenges and embrace a more positive mindset. And so with that said, let's slip into the stream. Well, welcome back to another BiteSize Friday episode. This week, we're revisiting a segment from an archived conversation with Neil Hanley, originally featured in Season 4, Episode 21. Now, in this segment, Nick discusses the psychology of change and how we as individuals and organizations can better adapt to the inevitable shifts in our lives. Now, Nick describes change as a human ability, something that we all possess but often overlook. He explains how our brains are wired for pattern recognition, a skill that can be used to navigate and embrace change more effectively. Nick also outlines 3 principles for managing change: understanding our diverse reactions, the importance of maintaining a sense of control, and finally, giving ourselves time to process these changes. So whether you're facing a personal transition or leading an organizational shift, this bite-sized episode offers advice that you can start applying today. So without further ado, let's slip into the stream and hear from Neil Hanley.
Yeah, I think early on I found, especially I was working in business and also in mental health and in academia all at the same time. And one of my favorite things, if I have a talent for something, it's probably finding patterns across and finding this sort of core fundamentals across different disciplines. And that's what I found, this sort of fundamentals about human beings, how we adapt to change. And I would go as far to say, to be honest, I think, change isn't always easy, but change is the human superpower. We're not the biggest, the strongest, we're not the fastest, we don't have big sharp teeth. But one thing human beings, is special about us is this ability to adapt to change in all kinds of different environments and circumstances. So yes, we have all these crazy changes happening around us in the world, this sort of VUCA context, as your listeners are probably familiar with that term by now. But this is something that we're made for. We are made for adapting to change. It doesn't always feel good, but we're good at it. And not only that, with this big forebrain that we have, we're able to actually create change and drive change. We're able to imagine a future that's different than it is today, that's better, and make a plan together to move towards that, or as individuals, teams, or a whole organization. So I think it's, yes, change can be difficult, but it's sort of, this is what we're good at.
You said change is a superpower. It's sort of our ability to evolve to a situation, to some sense, to project. Our brains can project how the future may play out, and that helps us to adapt to change. For some time now, the scientists have described the brain as a pattern recognition machine. For example, we might look at a rock protrusion or a cliff face and actually see a face in it. It's not to say there's actually a face, but it's something that the brain does called pareidolia. It's our brain's ability to try to make sense of a nonsensical world, to find patterns where there may not be actually any pattern. Can you speak a little to pattern recognition in the sense of change and how that helps us to adapt to change?
Yeah, that's actually interesting. It can kind of work for us and against us, because we like to find patterns and we like to create patterns. So we will adapt to a new situation partly by creating a new pattern, a new way of doing things, some habits, etc. And then when there is a need to change, sometimes that we need to actually use our abilities to disrupt that pattern. So that's where some of the discomfort and the so-called resistance to change can come from, is disrupting those comfortable patterns. But I think it's fair to say that, we forget sometimes that human beings, we don't just want comfort. We want actually things not to be the same pattern all the time. That gets actually quite boring. it's comfortable, but to work at our best, we need to be able to disrupt those patterns and have at least some changes, especially when we're in control of it ourselves. Then it's really great, or at least if we're involved and have some influence. I think the pattern recognition is that's the best way to change, is to actually be out front. If you can sort of see the patterns, changes in the context around you, whether it's global themes or something in your country or your industry or in the context of your organization or your personal life at home, seeing that there's patterns, there's different needs here. I think you and I are both parents, so you see your kids changing, and their needs are different at different ages. So maybe you need to adapt their parenting style or some of the rules or whatever it is that you have at home. So kind of having that pattern recognition, not just sort of going through the day to day. As you said, we can get stuck into being tourists in our own lives and just sort of going through the motions, but trying to keep that scanning, that sort of situational awareness broadly, and seeing the opportunity to create a change ourselves. That's the ideal way. And then sometimes some of the changes are just going to happen to you, and you have to adapt in a slightly more passive way. But I really would recommend people to look for those opportunities to change before you need to.
I don't think anyone and any of our listeners is new to change. I mean, it's been with us since forever. But I guess the difference between someone who reacts to change and someone who's reflective and then chooses to act to change comes down to some level of self-awareness. And what I hear you speaking to, Neil, is that for someone to recognize the patterns, they need to stop up sort of their automatic, habitual way reacting to something new that enters their life. And let's say it shows up on their doorstep uninvited. Let's say it's that. You said we have the superpower in order to adapt as humans in general. But I guess there's a different level. Some people tend to be much better at adapting, evolving to change, or equanimity than others. And so from your experience, clinical and corporate experience, what makes the difference between two people can have the same exact thing happen to them, but react completely differently?
That's great. I'm so glad that you asked that question. This is something I discovered doing leadership training, is that even a lot of experienced leaders, some of them, hadn't occurred to them, which surprised me a lot. It hadn't occurred to them that people are actually different from them, and we react quite differently to change. We all have the ability to adapt to change and sort of be proactive, but based on your personality, if your listeners have heard of the 5-factor model of personality, or really any model of personality, each different personality variable has influence on the way that you sort of perceive, react to change, or how much change that you typically can handle at one time, at least as a starting. Personality is a starting point. There's lots of other factors, of course. But starting with, there's a personality characteristic, openness to experience, very directly related to your openness to change, really. Openness to other ideas, different ways of doing things. So people scoring high in that will typically be the ones often scanning, what's new ideas, what's the new trend, how could I do something different? Whereas people scoring low in that kind of personality variable, they really like to get into a regular routine, and they will really not want to change as much. So they have less sort of interest in changing. And both of those are important. We need the people who are actually a bit more conservative and say, well, let's hold on to the way we're doing stuff. It's been working. We're all still alive and thriving. So let's hold on to that. We need that. We don't want to just change willy-nilly all over the time. So that's a really important point to get across. All of the personalities have different reactions to change, but those reactions are actually really important. Then we could take something like people's sort of stress tolerance, for example. Some people can handle the stress of a lot more change, even if it's just happening to them and they're not in control. That's more stressful, but some people can just handle a lot more stress, and others, they need a little bit lower level of stress, a little bit less change at one time, and maybe more time to process it, etc. So very different reactions to change, all of which have their strengths. And that's one of the things that there's sort of three main things I try to make sure that everyone knows about change. And that's one of the big core ones, that we are different. We react differently to change. So expect people to react differently, give them space to react differently, and ideally try to use their strengths of the personality and channel those into a really good sort of change plan.
So these three, you said we are different, to understand that each of us approaches change in a different way with different angle based upon our experience, our background, our culture, what have you. Yeah. And the second is we react differently, or is that part of the first one? Could you just go back and articulate the 3 points that you tend to speak to when it comes to change?
Yeah, sure. There's
just a recap.
Yeah, and those two I would say are the same. That there is, people are diverse, and we have different ways to react to change, and each of those reactions isn't necessarily bad. Even it's easy to label someone as resistant to change. But that's actually a good thing. That's part of the reactions that are important for human beings to really challenge changes. So anyway, we are different. That's one of the sort of three theoretical fundamentals I'd like people to know, whether they are a leader or a person in an organization, or just for themselves individually reacting to change. So recognize that you're different, and ideally get to know yourself, understand, what is your personality and sort of starting point. Do you typically like a lot of change, not so much change? So understand yourself and understand that not everyone's going to be the same as you. So we're different was number one. The second one is, when it comes to change, control is king. The academic literature and it is very clear that the more control you have over a change, or more, at least the influence that you can have over that change, the better it tends to go. So if you're a therapist or coach, pushing someone into doing something to sort of face their fears, if they have a phobia, let's say, really pushing them hard to do it, is not really what you want to do. You want them to voluntarily take on that challenge, something difficult. So that's fundamental. The more control and influence you can give people in the change, the better it goes. So that's the second. The third is that change is a process. People need time to process the change. So in that case, if you're, say, running change in an organization, recognize that you make a realistic timeline that will give you time to involve people as much as you can, and give them time to sort of discuss and process. You mentally have to disrupt a familiar pattern. And so it takes time for people to understand, okay, why are we really doing this? Why is it necessary? What's the future way going to look like? How's that going to affect me? What do I need to do differently? Do I need to build skills, etc.? They need time to sort of think through all that, so that cognitively to take the time to process it, but also emotionally. There's sort of an emotional cycle that you tend to go through when it comes to changes. And it's not a straight cycle either. You might jump all around in that cycle, and that's just that's normal for people to go through those cycles. Some go through it fast, some go through it slow. But the point is to give yourself or others time to process that, and realize that they'll be at different stages of processing depending on when they first heard of the change or starting to affect them.
Yeah, I think that third point you said, the time to process the change, because we both have a clinical background in psychology, and when I used to work with trauma, one of the major things that helped people make sense of what happened to them was their ability to process the emotion. And we've spoken many times on this show where, emotions are information. And when we take on that information, maybe it's not always the best information, or sometimes it could be very accurate information, but not to take those emotions as instructions as to what to do, as you said before, to stop up, see the pattern, recognize what those emotions are, and sort of assess. And when you said process the change, I like what you really said is kind of, especially in organizations, when you're mapping, to help people map what we're going to do and what the future may be like. I think that's what we talked about at the top of this, or at this of this conversation, where you said we have this superhuman ability to kind of project into the future to create some sense of certainty. And I think that's very important. I'm in and out of organizations all the time, and sometimes an organization will implement change, but sometimes it comes to a shock to the system, especially if it's that change after change after change. People have not even settled before new change comes. And I think part of what you're saying is explaining what the change is, but why we're having the change, and the why of the reasoning makes sense. People may not always like the idea, but if they understand the reasoning behind something, then you get some level of buy-in or ownership. I was wondering if you could speak a little to that. I know you work in a big corporation yourself, and I'm sure it's susceptible to a lot of changes. Could you speak a little about that part?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a great starting point when it comes to the topic of change. Is why do we need to change? Why is it important for change? And we did talk about it early. The sort of the context, the world changes whether we like it or not. Sometimes for the good, sometimes for the bad. And it's sort of adapt or die is strong language, but adapt to thrive is maybe a nicer way to say that. And also, if you want to get the best out of people, you need to sort of paint a compelling future towards them that, maybe things are actually quite good today, but they could be even better. And maybe they could be like this. And what if we make a plan to try to reach this particular kind of goal? So to really inspire and to get the best out of people, most people, they want actually to go in a direction that's something that's different and better than it is today. So change is really the tool that sort of gets us there, and doing it in the best possible way together is something that tends to get the best engagement from people. You want the best engagement, the best performance, then doing change and doing it in a good way is the way to get there.
If you want more, why not go back and listen to the original full conversation with my guest? You will find the link in the episode in the show notes. So make sure you hit that subscribe button. And I'll be back next week with my long-form conversational episodes on Monday and the latest bite-sized episode on Friday. And have yourself a relaxing and rejuvenating weekend.